Item 6, consider appointing a council representative for each of the following boards and commissions. Capsol Board, Planning Commission, Parks and Recreation Commission. Do we have nominations for the Capsol Board?
I'd like to nominate, I know I'm gonna screw it up, that's why I asked her before, her new, Lori Akambi. I keep wanting to call her Struther, I'm sorry.
And that's all right. That's all right.
Okay, we have Lori Akambi. Do I have a second?
Second.
Can we move through those?
No, we take these individually. Individually, we'll vote on the motion.
Okay, so for Capsol Board, Lori Akambi. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Lori will be on Capsol. Thank you, Lori. Planning Commission. Do we have a nomination for Planning Commission?
I nominate Kenny Lee. Mayor Kenny Lee.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Parks and Rec Commission. Do we have a nomination for Parks and Rec Commission?
I'd like to nominate Jeremy Sloat.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor, Jeremy, for the Parks and Rec Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That concludes the first part of the organizational meeting. This time, I think we can move into our regular business meeting.
Should we do the pledge?
Yes. So, Mr. Wood, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Be happy to. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So welcome everyone to our first meeting in 2025. For those in attendance this evening, if you wish to speak at the scheduled public hearing or the citizen comment period, please sign up on the appropriate sheet in the back of the chambers. Item 1 is the adoption of the meeting agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor of adopting the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Pass 5-0. Item 2, matters from the mayor. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to my colleagues for electing me mayor. It's a special day for me for a lot of reasons, and there's some folks out there that I'm happy to see, and thank you for coming. Sam, good to see you. I plan to do the best job that I can. It's a blessing to be here. It's a blessing to serve. So thank you for that. Item 4, item 3 is matters from council members. Anybody have anything?
Just want to say congratulations to you and Ms. Akambi Mrs. Akambi for your new positions. We look forward to what you bring us in the next 2 years, and congratulations to our 2 new council members. And anything we can do to help bring you along, that's what we're here for.
Thank you all so much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I'll just echo that, and so excited to be able to serve with both of you in this new capacity, as well as welcoming our 2 new colleagues. So glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Item 4 is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Is there a second?
I
So-
second.
Any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Comby. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 5 is the second consideration of an ordinance amending Chapter 98 zoning of the city code to provide for cottage court housing. Mr. Ham?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, this evening, Ms. Tate is going to give a very brief summary. We felt like it was appropriate to do that, given that we've had the holiday break and the fact that this issue has transitioned across
two separate councils, but we're confident that the community and most individuals present in the room have seen this material, but we felt like it would be a little awkward to call the question or take additional discussion without a little bit of a refresher. So we've planned to do that, and we'll take it from there.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. As Mr. Hamp said, this ordinance has been a long time in the making. We've had several work sessions, planning commission public hearing and a council public hearing, and several presentations before you, but I did want to provide a little bit of a refresher of the proposed ordinance this evening. So this is for a cottage court housing ordinance to add an additional type of residential development within the city of Waynesboro's zoning code. So how we're defining cottage housing within the ordinance is that it's a grouping of small houses that would be arranged around a common area or multiple common areas. This type of development is designed to promote a sense of community and that you have that shared common space. The ordinance does provide for the ability for houses in cottage courts to be detached, attached, or townhouses. And then, you know, it kind of appeals to a variety of people, specifically young professionals, couples, empty nesters, older adults, single adults, and small families. So the cottage court ordinance is required to amend, just to kind of get into the specifics. You have to amend the ordinance in several different places to enact the ability for this. And so one is in section 98-2.3, which is where we lay out all of our different housing types and kind of show images that represent those. So it would be adding cottage court housing to that section of the code and defining it as a group of small detached houses, attached houses, or townhouses, although the townhouses are limited to 4 attached units per structure and then up to 50% of that entire development. Or tiny homes fronting around a common space. A cottage court may be developed on individual lots or with a common form of ownership. And, you know, we have talked about that before, and that you could have multiple units on one property, or you could have them subdivided and sold individually. And then the kind of difference there is from our existing subdivision ordinances that they wouldn't be required to have the road frontage that they are now required to have. And then to clarify, because I think there is some confusion when we talk about permitting this type of housing in all districts, but I want to clarify that it is only allowing for someone to apply for a conditional use permit in any of the zoning districts, but in no way would the adoption of this ordinance create any by right entitlements. It would just allow a developer, individual, to come forward with an application, and that application would be reviewed by your staff. It would be reviewed at a public hearing by your planning commission, and then ultimately reviewed by council, approved or denied. And if approved, you can also set any range of related conditions to that specific permit. So when we say it can be permitted in all districts, it's only through after that rigorous process that would come before you. I've already covered the definition of the cottage court housing. It's also important to lay out kind of the purpose and intent of the ordinance. And so there is a purpose and intent section that kind of identifies what type of use or what type of development this could be and how it might be infill or redevelopment, and that really the intent is that it fit into the existing character of neighborhoods. And so when you lay that out up front very clearly, it puts developers and staff on notice that essentially that's the most important part, that you're evaluating these different developments to see if they are compatible and fit into the character of existing neighborhoods. The ordinance also has a general use standards that covers a range of different requirements. There's a unit size requirement. There's no minimum, because there's no minimum size requirement in the city today for any type of residential development, but there is a maximum size requirement of 1,200 square feet of finished floor area or 1,700 square feet of gross square footage. There are parking requirements within the ordinance. There's also common area requirements, so that there's a certain percentage of common area required for each unit. There's also a certain requirement for private area, so that could be your front porch or your individual yard space or a patio. There's also parts within the ordinance that talk about the orientation of cottage units and kind of the aesthetic components, and that they shouldn't turn their back on the street, and that there should be kind of visually appealing elements since they are turned around a common space. The ordinance also covers buffer requirements, and then there are also area and dimensional standards that cover the setbacks, that there's a minimum of 4 units that kind of make up that cottage court and a maximum of 20 units per acre. And then it also goes into building height and building separation, which is mostly governed by building code requirements. So the intent of the ordinance is really to allow for a kind of different type of development than we currently allow for. It does allow for creativity in that you don't have to have frontage on a public road, and so that does cut down on the amount of roads being laid and the amount and distance of sewer lines and water lines, and the hope there is that there could be some we could realize some greater affordability with some of these. It also, you know, I know tiny homes is what we kind of seem to focus on in the cottage courts, but it could permit a range of housing sizes up to 1,200 square feet. But really kind of the main point here that's different than your existing subdivision ordinance is that you would not have to have every lot front on a public road, and that there could be some greater density fronting around a common area. And, you know, attractive to one thing that we saw from the housing study is that we have a lot of need for 1 and 2 bedroom units, but we don't have that many 1 and 2 bedroom units. So hopefully, you know, if a developer was interested in these, that it could meet a need within the market. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
So before I move forward with this, in my excitement and zeal, I overlooked some of the things on item 4, the consent agenda. Can we amend the agenda so that we can cover those?
So, I'm not sure that you have amended anything. If we had a motion to approve the consent agenda, we typically don't enumerate, so unless there was an exception or an addition that wasn't verbalized, then we should be okay procedurally. Because I practice law with the attorney reps.
Yes, when you have a motion to approve the consent agenda, it approves A, B, and C.
Okay.
Unless somebody wants to remove A, B, or C from the consent agenda and deal with them individually.
All right, thank you. I feel better.
You're doing great.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tate. Are there any questions on, we covered what Ms. Tate gave, any questions and concerns? This ordinance has been properly introduced and discussed. If we're ready to vote, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, 5-0. Item 6 is to hold a public hearing and consider granting an extension to lease space on the cell tower located at 300 Parker Heights Road. Do we have Mr. Bowman for that?
We do not. So much in the same position as the previous item, but less complicated. We felt like that because these 2 items had some detail in them, ordinarily we would have put them in the consent agenda, but since we were transitioning to 2 new members, we've pulled them out so that they can receive individual consideration. We had the required public hearing. This is a 2-read ordinance, so unless there are questions or additional discussion, much like the last item, you can simply call the question.
Okay, any questions on the lease agreement?
No, I'm good with it.
So all in favor of extending the lease agreements, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you. Item 7 is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending City Code Section 78-61 and 78-63 regarding real estate tax exemptions for qualifying elderly and disabled residents, setting the qualifying criteria and applicable relief.
So this process is required to correct some printing errors and to correct misalignment between the online code and the printed code. And unfortunately, it requires a redo of the entire process. So we'll have a public hearing this evening, introduce the ordinance, and then a second consideration at the next meeting. But substantively, it is the same. The materials in the packet were correct, but the printing that was not correct, so we have to do a do-over. Let me restate that. The materials in this packet are correct. There was misalignment between the materials in the first packet and the subsequent work, but we're in good shape now.
I hereby open the public hearing. Do we have anybody?
No one has signed up to speak.
Okay. I hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Comby. Any discussion? This ordinance will receive final consideration at the January 27th regular business meeting. Item 8 is to consider adopting a resolution certifying new streets to submit to the VDOT Urban Maintenance Program. Sam?
Yes, sir. Each year, the city staff goes through a process of inventorying new streets that have been completed as part of new development in the community, and in some cases, a review of existing streets that may have been listed as non-conforming, just to, in some cases, we found that, in fact, they were. But annually, we take that work on the part of staff, compile it, and have the council certify it by resolution, and then we submit that information to the Department of Transportation to include in our street inventory, which is the basis for our urban maintenance funds that we receive for street maintenance in the community. So this year, I think we're submitting 0.88 lane miles of new streets that are eligible for urban maintenance funds.
Any questions? Is there a motion to adopt a resolution certifying the new streets?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Sloat. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. All in favor, say aye.
Well, Mr. Mayor, as an employee of the Virginia Department of Transportation, I'll be abstaining.
Thank you, Mr. Short. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Abstain.
Pass 4-0 with Mr. Short abstaining. Item 9 is to receive a presentation regarding rental fees for park shelters, including a recommended rental fee schedule for Sunset Park Shelter. Sam?
Yes, sir. This evening, Dwayne Jones, the Director of Parks and Recreation, will present some information and a recommendation for a rental fee schedule for park shelters to include Sunset Park. As you know, that park opened last year, and it has not been part of our reservation and rental program. The staff feels like that the park presents a unique opportunity, and it would be appropriate to at least consider adding it to our rental program. And given the unique nature of the asset, that it maybe has some exceptional or specific consideration when it comes to fees. So Mr. Jones is going to review sort of the overall program very quickly and then focus on recommendations related to Sunset Park. I would say as a preemptive or introductory comment, if at the end of the presentation and whatever discussion may occur, the council is comfortable or can achieve consensus with a fee structure as presented, then we would appreciate it if you could approve that by motion. On the other hand, if you'd like to take some time to reflect on the presentation and develop a consensus, we certainly can take a meeting or two to do that. So, and I'll introduce Mr.
Mayor, members of council, it's my pleasure to be here. And first of all, I want to welcome our two members, Mr. Sloat. I'm happy to have you on the Parks and Recreation Commission board. Ms. Akambi, happy to have you as well on council. And I'll tell you both that I gave Jeremy a business card with my cell phone on it. I'll do the same for you. If you're out and need information, these three gentlemen text and call me. My phone is always on. You walk in the Greenway and someone has a crazy question, feel free to call or text. Happy to answer that on the spot. We pride ourselves in trying to get information out as quickly as possible. So, but we are excited to talk a little bit about our shelter rental program that we are proposing for Sunset Park. Just want to give you a quick overview of what we do and all the other park shelters. In Ridgeview, we have 2 shelters, North, Basic, Corner Spring, and Constitution have 2 different shelters in that as well. And so several years ago, we went to a block scheduling because of their popularity to put more people in the shelters. All of those shelters have an 8 to 2, that's a $40 reservation fee, and then a 2 to dusk is a $40 reservation fee, or if you want it all day, it's $75 if you want to rent for the whole day. In 2024, we had over 375 paid rentals, and that created a revenue of $15,000. We are not an enterprise fund, so I'm not able to exactly put that back in there, but I've worked closely with the finance department. If we need a new roof or we need picnic tables, that is an offsetting expense for maintaining those shelters. Sunset by the numbers, since opening in June, we have over 50,000 cars have visited the park. Using conservative math at 2 per vehicle, that's over 100,000 people that have visited Sunset Park. It is quite popular with folks, and it is, I think, a huge success for the city and the views and everything that folks get to enjoy. We have also hosted some special events that have been Parks and Rec events. We've had ice cream and Sunday night concerts. We've hosted a Wings over Waynesboro. We just this fall had a wine over Waynesboro. The park was designed for these types of things with its overlooks and patios and different things. And the shelter, of course, is a key component of that, and they've been quite popular. This is the shelter structure. I'm not trying to find the gold at the end of the rainbow, but it is no doubt that these shelters are popular and are revenue generators for the city. Sunset Park is, again, a little bit different, as Mr. Hamp alluded to. And we have used some of these numbers in other types of things we do, but we found that if it's a standard event, say under 100 people, then a standard park rental would apply. And in this situation, really the only thing that we have changed is our time situation. I do want to be clear that when you rent the shelter at Sunset, you're renting the shelter. You're not renting the entire park. So the park would remain open. For instance, if there was a birthday party at noon on a Saturday, the overlook would still be available for folks. The trails would still be available. It is strictly reserving the shelter itself. But we do think that with the Sunset and the fact that it is open past dark, that having a third time slot, if you will, would be advantageous to folks looking to use the shelter. So we've devised 8 to 2, sort of covering the lunch, the morning, 2 to 6 to cover sort of the afternoon, and then a 6 to 10 covering the evening, and then cutting a slight break if you wanted to rent the shelter for the entire day for $100. If you have over 100 folks or wanting to have some type of larger event, then we have in the city a special event application. We've applied some of that same logic in the Sunset Park. Many of you have been there. We do believe that it may be a popular spot for weddings based on its proximity, based on its views. And so with that, we've come up with a couple different things that we think are important to cover, and that's an alcohol, if folks want to have alcohol, say at an event or a wedding. There's a $250 charge for that. Rental items such as tents or tables or chairs, for instance, we have picnic tables there, but those aren't necessarily conducive, say, for a wedding event where you'd have chairs and tables and possibly a dance floor and things like that. And again, anything over 100, we're also proposing to add a $500 deposit for a damage waiver. The alcohol fee, basically where this is coming from is the communication that occurs with my special events manager and the folks renting the shelter. You can now rent a shelter, pay it online, go to Ridgeview, and I never see you. It is seamless. You have the shelter. Unless there's an issue, then you have your picnic. It's a wonderful Saturday. We come and pick up the trash the next day. and so there's no communication. We believe that when we add alcohol into the mix, there needs to be more communication with the public, and that's going to require more one-on-one, more FaceTime, walking folks through that process, and walking them to Sunset Park. There are some special attributes that are different at Sunset Park, so we believe that small fee helps cover some of that communication that is going to be extra. Don't have alcohol? Not a problem, no fee. The rental items, additional chairs, tables will require staff to remove and secure existing pavilion picnic tables. So that requires effort and my staff and my time to move that and make space available if, for instance, there was a wedding or a large party over 100. So that was the purpose behind the rental fee. A damage waiver deposit, a deposit of $500 would be required when booking your event over 100 people. The deposit will be used towards any damages done during your event. If no damages are done, then the deposit will be returned or released. We haven't worked out the details of how we'll do that. We are able to take credit cards. It may just be a credit card hold, similar to make a hotel reservation until you actually do that. We think these are just potential fees that we may run into of things that we've experienced in the past, excessive trash, potentially broken tables or lights or other things like that. A lot of people like to staple in our pavilions for streamers and different things like that. We don't allow it in anywhere, but we believe that we have a sort of a clean slate at Sunset. We also have some lighting that is there, some low voltage lighting that is already there, and so we're worried that folks stapling and different things. So we've applied some different fees, potential damage fees that would be covered with that damage waiver. So just for instance, a sample wedding, 150 person, there would be a $500 damage waiver that we would collect and again return if there's no damage. A day rental would be $100, alcohol $250, table and chairs, and then so your grand total for say a 150 person wedding at Sunset Park would be $600. A couple other things, the fine print. We are proposing to start this in March 1st. We have had numerous calls and received numerous calls throughout this since we've opened, even before we opened, of folks wanting to rent the shelter. In 2025, we would like to limit those to 12 large events outside of our events to maintain the maximum use for the public. One of the nice things about Sunset that we have noticed since opening, unlike any other pavilion in the city, if there's someone sitting at a picnic table, folks will just come up and say, oh, do you mind if we sit? Let's watch the sunset together. That really doesn't occur in any of our other parks, but we've noticed that as a nice feature that happens at Sunset. So we want to maximize that opportunity for the public to just come, have a picnic, enjoy the sunset, and sort of limit that sort of large event that would basically exclude that for those folks. We won't have events in any of the meadow plantings that we have for habitat. No synthetic throw material for obvious reasons. Again, chalk, different things in the pavilions, and then nothing affixed to the pavilions with nails or staples or tape or anything like that. And I am happy to take any questions that you may have regarding sunset fees.
Any questions?
I have a question. Specifically, your wording says that in 2025, it will be limited to 12 events per year. And so that implies that this number will change as time goes on?
What we're proposing for this coming year is 12 large events, so over 100. We won't limit regular rentals, those types of things, but sort of that 12 number. And again, part of it is sort of getting our feet wet. We have not turned the keys over, so to speak, to private events. Having done this a long time, we've learned the hard way how to take care of things and different things. So we think sort of limiting that large event, because we do believe that suppose we've had this scenario, so you have it the back half of the park where the shelter is, and say an overlook for a wedding, and Mr. Wood brings his family up to see the sunset and is surprised about, oh my goodness, there's a huge wedding and there's dancing. It still will be open, just as we think that limiting that to sort of get our feet wet. If we come back and we say, you know what, we only rented 3 times, then it's maybe a non-issue. We think it's going to be popular, so we would rather start small, and if we decide to expand next year, say 26, and we say 12 events were a piece of cake, let's do double that.
So, Mr. Jones, where do you think going, though? I mean, certainly, I think you have some idea about where you think the numbers are headed, so where do you think it's headed?
It's hard to say. I do believe that there's the balance of 600 certainly is not inexpensive, but in terms of balancing that with what it costs to have a wedding, say at a winery or some other local places, it's very inexpensive. Now, granted, when you do that, if someone's kicking a ball or throw a frisbee at your wedding, that's going to happen in a park, as opposed to, say, a private venue in the private sector. So there is a balance of trying to determine, what's reasonable for the public to play, and then what's too much. And so that's kind of where we tried to strike the balance with, again, a 600 maximum, and then limiting those numbers to 12.
So, Dwayne, so in no instance would the park be privately reserved?
Correct. It is just a shelter, and suppose there's some surrounding areas, but you would still be able to go to the main overlook. We do not intend, if someone were to have a wedding, it would have to be near the pavilion or near there. We would not take the main overlook that folks enjoy for the sunset to host a wedding. We just wouldn't put that into the, and again, part of that's the conversation with folks to have that say, these are your options. And again, explaining those options, meeting them on site, showing the different nuances of having a wedding there. That's part of what that fee will cover that time. So.
What are your thoughts about it? I'm curious why we would not, for larger events, those, events that have over 100 with alcohol, not require liability insurance with the city as a rider?
It's something we could explore, but it's not something that we do currently. But we certainly could work with Melissa and Jordan, figure out if there's ways to do some of that. And part of that was the thought process behind the damage waiver, and working out some language. Because when you actually do sign a reservation, it is an informal contract. There's rules that you say, I agree to. Like no staples, but we come back and there's staples. So,
and the reason for it was sort of connected to the root question of the commingling of the public versus a private function with serving alcohol, and so to maximize the parties, the renters' liability, and to protect the city's liability. It would seem that would be an appropriate consideration to consider liability insurance in those events. Other one was actually not as relevant. I think you've addressed it. So, with regards to the number of planned 2025, for the lack of a better term, Parks and Rec events, right? That they would be closed to the public. What's the number of events that you have sort of planned this year? Just two?
So basically our plans, really, I say closed, it's really open to the public. We did 2 ticketed events, the Wings over Waynesboro and Wine over Waynesboro. We're planning to have those again in 2025. Of course, the ice cream on Sunday nights was free and open, right. But those are currently our only 2 events. Now, we did change some things for the wine event, which was the park was still open. You just needed to pay a fee to participate and get the wine tastings. And I think it worked really well, as opposed to the wing event where we closed it at the gate, we took your money, had to pay to get up to see that. We changed that for the wine event. Still came up, still have a picnic, still listen to the bands, but you had to pay if you wanted to partake in the wine samples. And I think folks really enjoyed that sort of change. So we really didn't close it except for the wings. We plan to do the same in 25 with the same format. So technically we will not be closing it to the public. We will just be using that as a fee to say, get a beer ticket or something like that. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any questions because I'm kind of at an unfair advantage being there with you guys on the Parks and Rec Commission as this was laid out. I just wanted to say that, in the time the park has been open, it's all been a learning experience. So just like you said, the difference between Wings over Waynesboro and the wine festival, you learn the difference. So I think as this goes along, you'll fine tune it. You'll, as we learn more about just the way the park runs and the way the people handle the events in the park, just as long as everybody knows that it's still going to be open to the public, whether the shelter is rented or not. I think that's just as important as anything. So thanks for all your work, Glenn.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just to double down on the liability while I get you on
Sure.
Mike, is that again, the principal concern of a $500 damage waiver and the scope and scale of the damage that could occur, and the ability to require, and, to get the funds back above and beyond a $500 damage. I'm trying to think of worst case. I think you and I have seen plenty of damage at some of the other parks in
Right.
the past, and that before you can blink and you're over $500.
That's right. And again, part of that is just a little bit of a balance. Do you have 500 on your credit card to hold that? Some of
Right.
those kinds of balance. I will say this to clarify. So if there was an outside event that wanted to have an event at Sunset, and it was, say, a civic organization or something else, we do require that they produce a liability for those types of events because the public is invited. And we've done that, Chili Brew, all different types of
Right.
events through our special event. They have to have event liability insurance because the public is involved. This scenario, it's private, and in other words, you've invited your 100 guests, and supposedly if 25 people show up that aren't invited, they're not getting to the buffet. So that's sort of that. It is a slippery slope, if you will, and I do want to emphasize that there will be no staff at these events. So that's part of why we will go over these rules. We do have cameras, so we can monitor. We do plan to, after these events, be back up at Sunset the following morning to check things to make sure that all is well, which we do not do at every other shelter. We eventually get to them, but we're not immediately heading there first to say, okay, we had a large event, it's a 150-person wedding, what does it look like? So there are some nuances there, and again, we certainly can explore some different options for that liability, as we move forward.
Mayor Lee, can I piggyback off the damage waiver? Just to clarify, I'm assuming all of us in here rented a car, and as you rent a car, you walk around the car, and you both parties agree where the damage is and things of that nature. So will you be doing that with folks, and then will you be collectively, both parties signing an agreement to say, okay, we agree that this is what it looks like?
Exactly. That's the plan, and part of that is part of this fee to cover that process, to make sure. And again, we will, our special events manager will work out that checklist. That will be gone over. Here's the rules. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Everybody agrees to it. We come back the next morning. If benches are gone or any number of things, then we go to the list and try to, like you said, walk through that list and say, okay, this, and this. It will be a trial and error because, the fees, excessive trash, it's possible damaging. The picnic tables are fairly industrial, but I've seen a lot of broken things. And but you're right, that a picnic table is more than $500. So at that point, then it's a situation to where it's either willful damage or we have it on camera. And so we could take another route to collect over the 500. So.
Thank you.
With the alcohol fee, will they be restricted to the pavilion area for the consumption of the alcohol, not permitted through the rest of the park?
Correct. We will work with ABC, and there will be there won't be fencing per se, but there will be some definitions in that, what's called a banquet license.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Any other questions? Okay, so, is council prepared to approve the recommended fee schedule for Sunset Park?
I want to say that since this is in Ward A, I want to request a reflection period because I want to see if anyone has any constituents have any issues or whatever, any feedback that we may not have thought about here.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So we'll schedule at a later date for consideration.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dwayne. Item 10 is citizen comment period.
Pardon me. Yes, sir, we have one individual signed up to speak, Mr. Lyle Fitzgerald.
Hello, Mr. Fitzgerald, you'll have 4 minutes. These lights up here will turn green, and then it'll go to yellow when you have 30 seconds left. So just state your name and,
Well, this is a whole new ball game for me. So I've listened here, and this here seems like it's about Waynesboro, Virginia. But I am here to bring up a subject. I'm in the process of trying to get an attorney. I do plan on filing a civil lawsuit, class action lawsuit, if I can do it. I've dealt with Mr. Wood. He's familiar with me. Also dealt with the gentleman here from First Virginia. I've called the governor. I've called the senator. I've called the mayor when this all first started. I've lived in Waynesboro, Virginia for 22 years. I'm very respected. No drugs, no alcohol, no criminal record whatsoever. My father is a veteran, so I take a lot of pride in what I have. I've taken a lot of pride of what I've lost, because I've lost a lot in the past year. Every year, I also deal with mental illness and anxiety. Something that isn't brought up, I don't guess, around here in Waynesboro. As you know, there's a lot of people being evicted from homes, apartments. Whether they have drug problem, they have an alcohol problem, felon, whatever. I never thought that I would be that citizen. But last year, my world was turned upside down, and it's still traumatizing to this day. I have a new apartment. I'm trying to collect that I have a new place to enjoy. But I lived over on the other side of town for 20 years. I lived in my apartment for 15 years. Back in February, I have a yearly inspection because I'm on low-income housing. My wife is still recovering from having kidney cancer. Back in February of last year, me and my wife were literally thrown out on the street by property management, and I will tell you the name of the place, property management. Eric Fletcher and Kim and them told me and my wife it was time for me to get the hell out and go someplace else. I'm asking the city to do something for people like us. I have a voice. I can't work. I've done a lot for this town. I've cleaned the fire trucks at my expense just to make the trucks look good. I used to clean vehicles all the time. I've polished the wheels on them. I've done charity work I do for autism, for breast cancer awareness. I've done the Main Street Muscle the whole time it was going on. I have 2 cars. One car is actually sitting in a field now rotting because I can't put it where I live. You're only allowed to have 2 vehicles in public housing, and it's bullcrap. I have 4 vehicles. I pay taxes on this stuff, and I'm told what I can and cannot do. What I'm also asking is that I feel that since Housing Authority has their own inspector, that I feel that the city should consider having the zoning and building inspector come in and do these apartments. At the apartment over where I lived, I had a hole underneath the sink. When I first moved there after I got custody of my son, I didn't realize when I first moved in. I asked him the whole time I lived there if it would be fixed. No reply. You can see the bricks inside the wall. Last year, these new stoves that y'all aren't aware of have a glue that attracts the roaches.
thank you, Mr. Lau. I hate to cut you off, but you exceeded the 4 minutes. I would encourage you to contact your council person and have this dialogue.
Do you think the city can do any resolution to the situation for people like me and my wife?
I would encourage you to talk to your council person first, Mr. Lau.
Okay. All right, thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
No more. Item 11 is communications, correspondence, and calendar. Sam?
I don't have anything this evening, sir.
City manager requests a closed session. Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Mayor,
Oh.
I move that this meeting be recessed, that the city council of Waynesboro immediately reconvene in a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A7-8 for the following: to consult with the city attorney and be briefed by staff members regarding several matters of actual and probable litigation where such consultation and briefing in open meeting would adversely affect city's negotiating or litigating posture, and where these specific legal matters require a provision of legal advice by our attorney, as authorized by sections 2.2-3711A7 and 8 of the Virginia Code. The subject matters of the meetings are stormwater management issues, Hopeman Land Company, and Michael W. Martin and Brian Collins.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Float. Any discussion? This requires a roll call. Ms. Border? Yes, ma'am. Aye.
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 And we're in closed session. Do we have a nomination to reconvene out of closed session?
Mayor, I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the City Council of Waynesboro has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this City Council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro hereby certifies that, to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and two, only such business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the City Council of Waynesboro.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any discussion? This requires a roll call. Ms. Border? Aye.
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 We're back in open session. Do I have
I'll make a motion
Motion.
to adjourn.
I'll
second?
We gotta get Mayor out of here.
Who's second?